Today I thought I would start talking about some of my favourite Gothic reads. I read a lot of Gothic fiction and I thought it would be quite nice to give you some recommendations for books that I've really enjoyed. What I'm actually going to do is split this video into at least two because I have too many recommendations for you. And a lot of people like to curl up with a Gothic novel, in October, in fall, or maybe over Christmas. But I kind of think that the Gothic is for all year round. So my love of Gothic fiction probably started when I was studying at school and I read Bram Stoker's Dracula, which was published in 1897. And that's a book that I would recommend. It's a big chunky book, but I'm sure the story is familiar to most of you. But it really gave me the bug for Gothic fiction. But actually, it's, if you ask people, about the history of Gothic fiction, obviously often people will mention Bram Stoker, they'll mention Shelley. But actually, Gothic fiction goes back much further than that. The first novel that was sort of attributed to the genre is The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole, which was actually published all the way back in 1764. I've also read a book called The Monk, a Romance by Matthew Gregory Lewis, which was published in 1796, and that is crazy. I mean, that is a crazy, crazy story. If you want something that's just crazy, then that's one to pick as a historical introduction to Gothic fiction. But the options that I'm talking about today, or the recommendations, there's a bit of a mix between what I would sort of see as real core, real classic Gothic novels, and some more modern books as well that may interest you. But as I say, this will be the first of at least two videos. And if you have any suggestions of Gothic novels that you think I should read or I would enjoy, or that you'd like me to review, do let me know in the comments. And if you want to make sure you don't miss the next video, the next instalment of Gothic novel recommendations, subscribe to the channel, and then you won't miss it. So starting, some of these are quite battered as well. I did want to start with Jane Eyre. As you can see, this book is so beloved that even the cover has come off it. Jane Eyre was published back in 1847, and it's written by Charlotte Bronte, who's one of the Bronte sisters, as I'm sure you know. And of all the novels written by the Brontes, Jane Eyre is my absolute favourite, and it's one of those ones that I do pick up and reread from time to time. It is, I mean, it's a bit of a monster, but it is worth persevering. So it's a story of Jane. She's an orphan who's given into the care of her uncle, who then dies, and she's left with her awful auntie, and basically she gets sent to a school for orphans at Lowood, which is really awful. Imagine sort of workhouse kind orphanage stories, thinking of Dickens. You get the idea. It's a really grim start to her life, and the family that should be loving and caring for her has sort of passed her off to this very stern and dismal start. Once she's been trained and done her studies at Lowood School, she goes to Thornfield, where she takes up the post as a governess to a young French girl, and here she meets Mr. Rochester, and they fall in love. And I think probably most people know the story from there on, that Mr. Rochester has some secrets in his attic, literally, and it's about how they're sort of torn apart and brought back together again. I think it's quite an interesting one in terms of looking at it as a Gothic romance. The character of Rochester, I wonder how well it's aged over the years. He's quite controlling, and the way he treats his first wife and treats Jane as well in places is quite interesting. But it's almost as if he has to take this tumble from grace for him to lose everything to finally be worthy of Jane. And it was quite a groundbreaking novel at the time it was written. It was written as a first person narrative, which was more familiar. Most novels are written in third person, but it was more familiar to non-fiction. So there was a sense of the book being an autobiographical or memoir book, which obviously isn't. It's fiction, but she really draws you in from the beginning, and she's this strong character who's resilient and overcomes again and again these sorts of challenges that she faces in her journey. And in terms of a Gothic novel, we have Thornfield itself, this crumbling mansion, which I love in a Gothic novel, and there's lots of kind of tropes that come with a Gothic novel. The maiden in distress, or Jane certainly has a difficult time and ends up running away from Thornfield, but she finds her own agency, which sort of breaks that. But themes such as ghosts and doppelgangers and crumbling mansions, women in distress, these are all sort of really good Gothic tropes, and quite a few of those come into Jane Eyre. So if you've never read Jane Eyre, I would recommend it. It is a good Victorian novel. It takes a while to read through. It's over 400 pages, but it's worth persevering with. Secondly, I wanted to follow on with Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and as you can see, this is another really tatty old copy of a book. And the reason I wanted to follow on with Rebecca, which was published in 1938 by Daphne du Maurier, is because it feels like there's real links in terms of the storyline between this and Jane Eyre. Although Daphne du Maurier sort of never confirmed that it's a retelling of Jane Eyre, there are definitely similarities. So in this novel, it begins with an unnamed narrator who is working as a companion and travelling with this lady across Europe, and they're in Monte Carlo staying in a hotel, and the lady who she's the companion to is really overbearing and just not very nice, a real snob, and almost through accident our narrator meets Maxim de Winter, who is a very rich widow who's travelling through Europe trying to get over, or try and find himself really, after the death of his first wife Rebecca, who's the name of the title. And again, this is possibly a book that you already know, and is quite a well-known story, but if you haven't read it, it's just fabulous. Basically they end up going back to Mandalay, which is the name of Maxim's house, his own crumbling mansion on the Cornish coast. And the house is kind of haunted by the memory of Rebecca. She permeates every room, every possession that's in the house, and the narrator becomes haunted by this memory of this first wife and feels that she's very insignificant and just nothing compared to this vibrant and strong woman that Maxim was married to originally. And one of the other key characters in this is Mrs. Danvers. We're introduced to a really good, very sinister villain here, and Mrs. Danvers is the housekeeper of Mandalay, and she had a very close relationship with Rebecca and takes an immediate disliking to our narrator, the new Mrs. de Winter, and makes her life miserable and scares her and reinforces this idea that she doesn't belong. But there are mysteries and there are secrets and there are skeletons in the closet throughout, and it's another one of those stories where it feels like they have to lose everything to find each other. But one of the things that really stuck with me about Rebecca and about a lot of Daphne du Maurier's writing is the visual elements, the descriptions. The opening of this novel is really quite famous, where the new Mrs. de Winter, or the second Mrs. de Winter, is retelling a dream that she's had where she's returned to Mandalay after all these years, and she describes walking up the drive to the house, and it's so stunning, so dark and gothic, but really vivid and sensual as well. It's just a fabulous book. And if you like Jane Eyre, or if you don't fancy Jane Eyre but you like the idea of the story, this is a really good one to read, and there's a reason why it's on a lot of people's favourite reads lists. But if you are interested in Daphne du Maurier and you've already read Rebecca, I'd also recommend Jamaica Inn, which is another one of her books, which is another really Gothic book. Jamaica Inn is a real place. And this is a story about a young woman called Mary Yellen who's sent to live in the inn on the bleak Bodmin Moor. And she finds that her uncle, who she's sent to live with, is up to all sorts of mischief. And again, there's this really dark Gothic feel in this historical inn, and all the mystery that's going on, across Bodmin Moor. It's bleak and it's dark and it's unctuous. It's just a fabulous book. And also, Daphne du Maurier has written a huge range of short stories that are worth looking at. I didn't realise till recently that she actually wrote The Birds, which the film The Birds is based on, and that's a fantastic short story. So there's 2 or 3 collections of her short stories as well that are available, and they're all sort of Gothic and wonderful. So there's lots to read there. She's got a really good back catalogue of books to explore. I also wanted to mention The Woman in Black by Susan Hill. There was a point where Susan Hill was sort of bringing out a ghost story every year, and I was just sort of used to look forward to them coming out, but none of them ever really have reached for me the enjoyment of reading The Woman in Black. This was published in 1998, and you're probably aware of it. It was made into a film with Daniel Radcliffe not so long ago, but I still recommend the book over the film, really. But it's a chilling ghost story. It's about a man called Arthur Kipps, who's a junior solicitor, and he's recently lost his wife and child, and he's sent over to a house on it's called Eel Marsh House, and it's across this sort of tidal path that once the tide comes in is blocked off. So once you're there, you can't get back off the island. And it starts quite early on. He goes to the funeral of the woman who's his executive for her will, and he sees this sort of dark cloaked figure of a woman at the funeral, and that kind of sets the tone for the whole novel, really. And it's about his experiences at the house and the strange goings on and these sort of echoes of the past, and this mystery that sort of permeates through Eel Marsh House. But it's also about his own loss and his own sort of sanity. But it's a really short little read, and it's incredibly atmospheric. It's really spooky. It's really chilling. And I think for me, that's the difference between Gothic and horror. I think there's definitely an overlap, but horror can be really visceral, whereas Gothic tends to be a bit more on the uncanny, a bit more haunted. But it's a really great atmospheric little ghost story, and certainly worth a read if you haven't read it before. I also wanted to mention my absolute favourite Gothic novel, which is Shirley Jackson, The Haunting of Hill House. Don't get this confused with the recent adaptation that was on Netflix. Although some of the characters have the same names, it's a very different story. And this is kind of just the best crumbling house in the middle of nowhere, mansion, shadows and creepy things going on, kind of a novel. It's just fabulous. And Shirley Jackson, I just love all the books that I've read of hers. Another one, if you enjoy this, if you've read this one before, you might want to read We've Always Lived in the Castle, which is about 2 girls living again in sort of a crumbling mansion in the middle of nowhere after the rest of their family die in suspicious circumstances. But this particular novel is the story of Eleanor. She has recently lost her mother, who she's been nursing for many years. She has quite an unpleasant sister who is kind of cutting her out of everything. But then she receives this invitation to spend the summer in this haunted house, Hill House, as part of a study for individuals that are seen as sensitive. And there's an experience from her childhood where they started experiencing stones being thrown at the house that means that Eleanor qualifies for this. So she sets off, she steals the car, she sets off to Hill House, and there she meets Theodora and Luke, who are the other 2 subjects of the study. and they begin an unlikely friendship. They're each quite different in terms of their personalities. And then there's the doctor, who is Dr. Montague, who's actually running the experiment. And as time goes on, you know, Eleanor's sanity begins to come into question, and there's this you know, there's this question of whether the haunting she and the others are experiencing is all in their heads, or whether it's reality, and whether it's tied into the history of the house, or whether Eleanor is sort of projecting her own experiences of the loss of her mother. It has a really good ending as well. But I love this sort of ambiguous nature of this one. There's tons of atmosphere, and Shirley Jackson's prose is so spare and just fabulous. Just a really, really beautiful descriptive book, and it feels very 1950s as well, but definitely one I would give 5 out of 5. Go ahead and read. It's not too long, and as I say, if you enjoy that, then read some of her short stories. Read We've Always Lived in the Castle, and there are other novels that she wrote as well, but those are my absolute favourites. Next, I wanted to mention Angela Carter, who I mentioned in my previous video. And the reason I talked about the magic toy shop in the last video is I wanted to talk about this collection of short stories for this video. This is The Bloody Chamber, and this was one of my first introductions to Angela Carter as a writer, and it's a collection of short stories. They're feminist reworkings of fairy tales, and they are beautiful, so richly described, so sensual, so descriptive. The story The Bloody Chamber, which is the longest story in the collection, but there's also stories based on Little Red Riding Hood, is based on the story of Bluebeard. And funnily enough, we've talked about Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, we've talked about Jane Eyre. I kind of think there's a link again here with the story of Bluebeard, which is the fairy tale of a daughter who is married to this man with a blue beard for some reason, and he takes her home to his castle, and he tells her that she can go in any room, she can explore the whole castle, it's all of hers apart from one room. And he gives her a set of keys, but he trusts her and says you can go in any room you want, but you can't go in that room. But of course, like Pandora, Bluebeard's wife is very curious, and she opens the door and finds the bodies of all his past wives hidden in this room. So that's the fairy tale that The Bloody Chamber is based on. But it's so vivid and so beautifully described that you know, it's worth reading. They're just a fantastic collection. The Bloody Chamber itself is certainly my favourite short story in the collection. But if you've never read any Angela Carter before, you have an interest in fable or fairy tale, then this is a collection that you're probably going to really enjoy. And it was published in 1995, but it's really seductive and disturbing in equal measures. But yes, magic realism is the sort of the genre, but it's much more than that. It certainly belongs to be on a list of Gothic recommendations. I then wanted to move on to a few more modern books. You know, that if you enjoy Gothic fiction or traditional Gothic fiction, you're probably going to enjoy. I absolutely love this one. This is Dark Matter by Michelle Paver. So this was published in 2010, and she's written another book that's very similar actually to this that was published afterwards, but I think this is probably my favourite. It starts in 1930s London, where we have our protagonist Jack, who's signing up to be part of an Arctic expedition. And so they start off in London and they end up travelling to the Arctic, where they camp on a really isolated spot. They set up camp for a year, and when they arrive, it's the Arctic summertime, so really long days, almost always day, and then this is followed by the nights, which also never seem to end. And there's a sense of the third man here, which is, you know, there's something haunting them. There's something outside in the snow, and it's really scary. It's really scary, and I love books that are based in cold places. I don't know why. I think I'm probably going to do a video of recommendations about books about mountains. And this kind of it's not a mountain, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of that sort of really cold and alien landscape that they find themselves in. But it's really scary, really, really scary, as our main character Jack is isolated, and he begins to be haunted, you know, by these images around him that seem to be trying to get to him. So I really, really recommend this. You've got a really chilling, both, you know, metaphorically and based in the Arctic. It's a really, really good book. For those of us who remember Osborne's A Book of Ghosts that came out in the 70s, when I was a kid, there was always a copy of that in the libraries. This next book might be one that appeals to you. It's called The Apparition Phase, and it's by Will MacLean. This one was published in 2020, and I was lucky enough to get the second hand and find out when it arrived it was signed, which is always an absolute bonus. But it kind of reminds me of that 70s ghost hunting obsession that seemed to be running through that time. And this was shortlisted for the 2021 McKitterick Prize, and it really gives me the Shirley Jackson vibe. So if you've read Shirley Jackson before, you may enjoy this particular book. It's about some twins living in the 70s, Abby and Tim, and they decide to create a fake ghost photo, and they bring someone back from school to try and prank them with it, and it all goes horribly wrong. And then Abby disappears, and we never find out, or Tim doesn't know what's happened to her, and he's left kind of adrift and sinking into mental health challenges as a result of this loss of his sister, his closest you know, closest relative, his person in the world who's just vanished. And then he begins to kind of get pulled into this group of paranormal researchers, this kind of hippie-ish paranormal researchers who investigate haunted houses. And he gets invited to get involved with the seances and these ghost hunts that they're doing. And it all starts to go wrong. I really loved the atmosphere of the 1970s here. And as I say, it's just really dark, it's gripping, it's thrilling, but also I just really like the setting and the premise generally. It's one that I hadn't heard a lot about, but really, really enjoyed when I read it. And we're back to Jane Eyre again here, The Animals of Lockwood Manor. This book was published in 2020 by Jane Healy, and this is another reworking of the Jane Eyre or the Bluebeard story. But again, there's fantastic atmosphere. For me, all the books that I'm recommending, I love because of the atmosphere, the chills they give me, you know, as I say, Gothic's for all year round, not just for Halloween, but they're just books that really made my skin crawl in a very pleasant way. So this is a story about Hetty, and it takes place in the Second World War, and she's sent to Lockwood Manor with all the taxidermy from the National History Museum for safekeeping in case London's bombed. So she goes to Lockwood Manor, and there's all these really vivid descriptions of all the animal exhibits that she has to take care of in this house and keep track of. And while she's there, she kind of gets drawn into the strange relationships between the major who owns the house and his wife, Lucy. And if Jane Eyre is a story of a governess falling in love with the man of the house and there being the mad woman in the attic, this is the story of the woman going to work in the house and falling in love with the mad woman in the attic. It's just a really enjoyable, you know, really atmospheric read, and really nice historical fiction. But it took that story in a new way and made it quite fresh for me. So I enjoyed that as well. For those who might be fans of some of the books we've already mentioned. I'm only going to mention a couple more because I say I'm going to do another video on these, but I wanted to talk about a variety of sort of Gothic fiction. So this one is the Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock and that was written by Imogen Hermes Gowar, and that was written in 2018, so a little bit older. It was shortlisted for the Women's Fiction Prize, and it was Book of the Year in The Guardian and Times and other places. So it might be one that you've heard of, it might be on your radar. But if you like the sort of Gothic London streets, this is based in 18th century London. And it's a story of the merchant Jonah Hancock, who gets his hands on a real life mermaid, or what he's been told is the remains of a real life mermaid. And this opens the door to sort of a new world to him as he becomes a bit of a celebrity, touring, showing off this mermaid, and you know, getting richer off the proceeds. But it's much more than that. It's there's lots of planning and plotting going on behind the background, and it's sort of ribald Gothic romp, really, with brothels and backstabbing and, you know, all of those kinds of good themes and storylines that keep you reading. But it's, yeah, it's an enjoyable and unusual premise, and one that I enjoyed sinking into when I got it and read it. Last of all, I wanted to mention Melmoth by Sarah Perry. You may know Sarah Perry. She's probably most known for The Essex Serpent, which you know, came out to great acclaim. But this is the novel that came out, one of the novels that came out afterwards. Again, it was published in 2018. And I really love this. This was kind of everything I wanted The Essex Serpent to be. It's so dark, and again, a fantastic atmosphere. It's based in Prague, and if you've ever been to Prague and the old city and the dark streets, it's really brings that to life in a really beautiful way. I'm actually going to Prague next month, and I'm thinking of rereading this or taking this with me to read while I'm over there. And Sarah Perry, I heard her talking about this novel, and she was really ill when she was writing it, and at one point she was hallucinating the characters from the novel. She was that ill, and there is sort of a slight sense of a fever dream coming through in the story. But Melmoth is basically it's a fable of a woman who witnessed Christ coming back to life after he'd been crucified, but then denied it. So she's this spirit that's cursed to wander the world, to live in loneliness and find other lonely people to witness atrocities. And so it's this really dark spirit, and our character, who is living in Prague, Helen Franklin, she's sort of living a really austere life, and we get the feeling there's something in her past that's haunting her, and that's something that gets revealed as the book leads on. But she starts to think, or starts to believe, that Melmoth the Wanderer is following her through the streets of Prague. And there's lots of sort of backstories and asides in this, which I really enjoyed. But again, the atmosphere there is something that I really loved. And if you've enjoyed The Essex Serpent, definitely read it. And if you weren't sure, but you've been thinking about reading The Essex Serpent, definitely read it. It's a fantastic book. So I'm going to end the video there, because I think that's quite enough recommendations for one go. But I will be filming a second part to this video where I'll have more Gothic recommendations. But if you have other genres you'd like me to provide recommendations for or talk about, let me know. I'd really love to hear from you and hear your ideas. But in the meantime, if you've read any of those books, or if you read any of those books after watching this video, do let me know what you think. Thanks, and bye.